Have you ever pictured a beekeeper in their kitchen cooking something up? Not for dinner, but for their bees? It sounds a little strange, right? But believe it or not, this kitchen concoction is at the center of a huge story about survival, ingenuity, and a fight against a tiny, relentless enemy.
So that brings us to the big question. Why on earth would a beekeeper be heating up a solution just to soak a kitchen sponge in it? I mean, it's definitely not for cleaning the counters. No, this is all about preparing for a battle.
That's right. This whole process, this strange recipe, it's all designed to fight a predator that is, and this is no exaggeration, the absolute worst nightmare for honeybees everywhere.
And here it is. Meet our villain, the Varroa destructor mite. And let me tell you, with a name like that, it has a lot to live up to. And unfortunately for the bees, it really, really does.
You know, this isn't just some annoying bug. The Varroa mite is a parasite that literally latches onto honeybees and feeds on them. It's the #1 cause of colony collapse across the entire globe. So this is a huge problem, not just for the bees, but for our food system, which, depends on them for pollination.
So you're probably wondering, why don't we have this figured out by now? Well, here's the catch. A lot of the traditional treatments only work during a very specific time, when the hive doesn't have any sealed brood, which are the baby bees, the eggs, and larvae. See, the mites are clever. They hide inside those sealed cells with the developing bees, where they're totally safe from treatments. This leaves the colony wide open to attack for much of the year.
And that exact problem is what pushed beekeepers to get creative. It led them to a really powerful do-it-yourself solution. But this clever fix also happens to live in a very murky legal gray area.
Let's just break down why this whole DIY thing is happening. Look at the numbers. A commercial EPA-registered treatment costs about $12 per hive. The homemade sponge method? About $3. Now, if you're a small-time beekeeper, that's a nice saving. But imagine you have hundreds of hives. You're talking about the difference between spending $1,200 versus $300. That cost gap is what's driving this entire movement.
So is this even legal? Well, that's the tricky part. It all boils down to a weird bit of ambiguity in the law. The main federal act that governs pesticides, called FIFRA, is really vague about whether a person can mix something up for their own use, as in on their own property, in their own hives, as long as they don't sell or distribute it. And it's in that little loophole that this whole DIY method exists.
All right, so how does this kitchen recipe actually defeat the mites? Let's get into the really clever science behind the sponge.
The idea is actually pretty brilliant. The active ingredient that kills the mites is something called oxalic acid. But if you just put that in the hive, it's gone pretty quickly. The secret ingredient is glycerin. By mixing the acid with glycerin and soaking it into a sponge, you create this amazing slow-release system. The glycerin actually pulls humidity out of the air in the hive, and that process releases tiny, mite-killing doses of the acid over a long time. It's basically like a medicine patch for the entire colony that works 24/7 for about 2 months.
Now, I know the word acid can sound pretty scary, but the source material had a pretty funny way of putting it into perspective. Oxalic acid is a totally natural compound. You find it in lots of vegetables we eat all the time, like spinach and rhubarb. And the author jokes that you would have to taste test your mixture more than 1,000 times a day to get the same amount of oxalic acid you'd find in a single serving of spinach. The process itself honestly looks like something you'd see in a cooking show. You just combine the oxalic acid and glycerin, heat it up slowly, stirring until all the crystals dissolve and it's clear. Then you stand the sponges up in the hot liquid and let them soak it all up. Once they cool down, that's it. They're ready to go.
But, and this is a really, really important but, even though it feels like cooking, you're still handling chemicals. The instructions are crystal clear on this. Safety is everything. You absolutely have to wear safety glasses and waterproof gloves. You need to have baking soda mixed with water nearby to neutralize any spills. This is kitchen chemistry, for sure, but it demands respect and serious precautions. Okay, so the sponges are made and they've been made safely. Now what? How do they actually get into the hive to start fighting those mites?
The application is pretty simple. With gloves on, the beekeeper just opens up the hive and lays 2 of these sponge pads right on top of the frames, usually between the 2 main boxes where the queen is laying her eggs. The whole point is to get them right in the middle of all the bee traffic. As the bees walk all over the sponges, they pick up tiny amounts of the acid and spread it all throughout the hive. The pads just stay in there for about 2 months, doing their thing, and then they're carefully taken out and thrown away.
And that brings us right back to the heart of this whole thing. This entire story, from a recipe in the kitchen to a sponge in a beehive, it really shines a light on this bigger conflict.
right? On one side, you have beekeepers on the front lines fighting to save a species that's critical to our food supply. And they're using a cheap, effective tool they came up with themselves. But on the other hand, they're doing it in a legal gray zone, outside of the official rulebook. So it leaves us with a really tough question. How do we find the right balance between safety and regulation and the urgent need for cheap, effective solutions that come directly from the people who need them most?